Now, as we do so many weeks here at the Daily Dose, we need to get to our Daily Dose top 5. Memphis Grizzlies superstar Ja Morant, for whatever reason, seems to be trying to throw his career away. For the second time in 2 months, the NBA star was seen on social media flashing a gun. And while I don't expect the NBA to really do all that much discipline-wise, I guess they'll give him a suspension, but the season is so long, who really cares? Plus, we know Commissioner Adam Silver, he's like a stooge that just wants to be buddies with the cool kids, with the players. But that doesn't mean that Ja isn't going to flush his career down the toilet. When Morant has his head on straight and he's actually out on the floor, he is one of the most exciting players in the entire league. But that doesn't mean he can't go away. Today, our Daily Dose Top 5 is counting down 5 other players who were insanely talented, but they still managed to ruin their careers. Now, understand, I'm not talking about injuries. I'm not talking about guys like Greg Oden or Jay Williams or Brandon Roy or even someone like Bill Walton or Penny Hardaway. Because, yes, their careers were cut short, but those were injuries. They didn't do it to themselves. I mean, I guess Jay Williams did, but you know what I mean. Those are physical injuries. I'm talking about the guys that were so promising, but they could not get out of their own way. Today, our Daily Dose Top 5 is counting down 5 NBA players that threw their careers away. We start off at number 5, and we go back to a young player that was a 6'11 center with soft hands. And he could run the floor. And he was one of the top 3 high school recruits in the country back in 1984, along with John Williams, who went to LSU, and Danny Manning, who went to Kansas. He signed with North Carolina State University for head coach Jim Valvano, along with future NBA players Vinny Del Negro and Nate McMillan, to form one of the best recruiting classes in the entire country. Remember, that team already had little guard Spud Webb on it. However, Chris Washburn just couldn't stay out of trouble. During his time at NC State, he was caught stealing a stereo, which resulted in his being sentenced to 46 hours in jail, a 5-year suspended prison term, and 5 years of probation. Washburn gained a reputation for not wanting to work very hard, whether he was on or off the floor. Washburn was a terrible student. And there were actually a number of accusations that NC State was fudging his grades so that he could be eligible. But at times on the court, he would show flashes of really being a player. In the full season Washburn played with NC State, he averaged nearly 18 points a game and 7 rebounds a game. Washburn's best outing was actually against future top NBA draft pick Brad Daugherty and North Carolina back in February of 1986. And in front of a national audience, Washburn scored 26, and the Wolfpack actually upset the number 1 Tar Heels 76-65. So the Golden State Warriors selected Washburn with the number 3 overall pick in the 86 draft. They were hoping that veteran Joe Barry Carroll would help mentor the kid. Well, he sort of did, because Joe Barely Cares tutored Washburn how to never give any effort whatsoever. In 1987, Washburn would check himself into a drug rehab center with a cocaine addiction. He would eventually be traded to Atlanta. And in 1989, he was permanently banned from the league for failing 3 straight drug tests. In all, Chris Washburn played 72 total games in the NBA. He averaged 3 points. He averaged 2 rebounds per game. And he comes in today on our list of NBA washouts at number 5. We arrive at number 4. And while Chris Washburn just couldn't play at the NBA level, or he just wouldn't play at the NBA level, whatever, that isn't the case with our number 4 entry. Because we had a shooting guard / small forward out of Oklahoma State, and this guy was selected by the Phoenix Suns with the 46th pick of the 1991 NBA draft. But that draft pick was a little bit risky by the Suns, because our number 4 entry, he had started to smoke weed at a very young age. They say to deal with his social anxiety. Well, by the time he was in college, he was experimenting with way more than that. Immediately after the draft, Richard Dumas tested positive for crack cocaine and was suspended for his entire rookie season. But in 1992, Dumas came back. And in what was basically his rookie year, he averaged 16 points and 5 rebounds per game as the Phoenix Suns went all the way to the NBA Finals. You remember they had Charles Barkley, Dan Marley, Kevin Johnson, and there was Richard Dumas playing against Michael Jordan in those NBA Finals. And hey, Dumas wasn't bad. He averaged 16 points a game, including 20 points in Game 1 and 25 points in Game 5, which was a big win for Phoenix. But after the year, again, prior to the next year, he tested positive again for crack cocaine. And he was suspended again for an entire season. He came back in 94, but he wasn't nearly as productive. He failed another drug test. The Suns fired him. He signed with the Philadelphia 76ers, and he signed for head coach John Lucas, who had a little bit of a background with addiction, and he thought maybe he could help this kid. In his first 10 games in Philly, Richard Dumas scored in double figures 7 times, including 2 20-point games. Kid could play. He was off drugs, but he had developed an alcohol problem, and he couldn't stop it. Before long, he was out of the NBA. Played a little overseas. He ended up being arrested back in 2013 for 8 felony charges of theft. Richard Dumas had a bright career, but he just couldn't stay out of trouble. And he comes in today at number 4. We reached number 3, and we reach a guy that played his high school hoops here in my home state of Colorado for Denver's Manual High School. He would go on to play collegiately for the University of Montana, and with the 4th pick of the 1978 NBA draft, the New York Knicks selected him, where he was being dubbed the next Walt Frazier. That might sound crazy now, but at 6'5", this guy could shoot, he could pass, he could rebound, and he could defend. In his second season, Michael Ray Richardson became just the 3rd player in NBA history to lead the league in both assists with 10 and steals with 3, setting the Knicks franchise records in both categories. He also recorded 18 triple-doubles, the second most in franchise history, and he was a big favorite of that Madison Square Garden. However, in 1982, he was traded to Golden State as compensation because the Knicks had signed Bernard King. And there were rumors that Sugar Ray Richardson was getting into some trouble off the floor. Richardson would actually be dealt quickly from Golden State back to the East Coast, but this time he was sent to New Jersey. And in fact, Michael Ray Richardson led the Nets to one of the biggest upsets in NBA history in 1984 when they shocked the defending champion Philadelphia 76ers. You'd think it was the beginning of something big. Actually, it was the beginning of the end. Because on February 25th, 1986, Richardson was banned for life by then NBA Commissioner David Stern for his 3rd violation of the league's drug policy. He actually regained the right to play in the NBA in 1988, but he decided he'd rather just stay in Europe and play over there. He never played in the NBA again, despite the fact that Stern did reinstate him. Michael Ray looked like he was on his way to maybe even being like that Hall of Fame kind of player. He ended up crashing and burning thanks to his addictions. And he comes in today at number 3. So we arrive at number 2 on our list of NBA players that allowed their careers to unravel, and we reach another guy that couldn't just play at the NBA level, he could dominate at the NBA level. After starring at the University of Michigan from 82 to 86, this 6'11" power forward is still the all-time leader for that school in blocks. He finished his career averaging 13 points, 8 rebounds, and 2 blocks per game. The Dallas Mavericks made him the 7th overall pick in the 1986 NBA draft, and he made the NBA All-Rookie team in his very first season. The following year, he won the 6th Man of the Year award. He was averaging 14 points and 12 rebounds per game. During the 1988 NBA playoffs, Roy Tarpley and the Dallas Mavericks nearly went to the NBA Finals. They lost in the Western Conference Final to the LA Lakers. That was a 7-game series, though. And in it, Tarpley was pretty strong. He averaged 16 points, 13 rebounds, and 2 blocks per game. The following year, in 1988, Tarpley scored a career-high 35 points. He grabbed 17 boards in a loss to the Phoenix Suns. However, just 6 games into the 89-90 season, he was arrested for driving while intoxicated. Then he resisted arrest, and he was suspended by the NBA. In March of 91, he got another suspension after being arrested for a DWI again. Except now, cocaine was involved. A few months later, he had his 3rd violation, again with cocaine, and he was banned from the league for violating their policies. Roy Tarpley would actually return to the Mavericks briefly in 94, but then he was permanently banned from the NBA in December of 95. He was still drinking. He was still using cocaine. He was violating the terms of the court-imposed aftercare program. He finished his NBA career averaging 13 points a game, 10 rebounds per game. And in fact, Tarpley would sue the Mavericks and the NBA, claiming that their refusal to reinstate him had violated the Americans with Disabilities Act and that his addictions were a disability. The suit was settled out of court, and he never played again. But after such a promising start, Roy Tarpley played a total of 280 games. Not bad, but he was completely out of the league by 1995. And remember, he didn't play all those years. He had 3 different year suspensions in there. In 2015, Roy Tarpley would pass away at the age of 50, they say, from liver failure. Now, there are a lot of people that saw Roy Tarpley play, and they say he would have been an all-time great, but he couldn't change his lifestyle. And he comes in today at number 2. So we reached the number 1 player on our list of NBA players who flushed their careers down the proverbial toilet. And I'll be honest, our number 1 entry might be a little unfair because technically he never actually played in the NBA, but he couldn't have been any closer. And anyone who saw this guy play knew he was going to dominate. As a freshman at the University of Maryland, he was viewed as raw. He was undisciplined, but he ultimately developed into an All-American player. He led the ACC in scoring in his junior year. He was named the Player of the Year in his senior year. And his senior season, he had some performances. An overtime victory against top-ranked North Carolina, in which he scored 35 points, including 7 in the final 3 minutes and 4 in overtime. I mean, this guy could score inside. He could score outside. He could shoot. He could handle. He could rebound. He was so strong. He was named to 2 All-American teams. Well, in 1986, the Boston Celtics were in their prime. They were rolling, but they were beginning to get a little bit older, and they needed an influx of youth. So they made a trade with Seattle to get the number 2 pick of the 86 draft, and with it, they selected our number 1 guy, Maryland forward Len Bias. After the draft, Bias and his family returned to their Maryland home. On the 18th of June, Bias flew to Boston to meet with the people from Reebok about a $1.6 million deal to rival Nike and a guy by the name of Jordan. After returning back home to Maryland, Bias drove back to the campus at the University of Maryland. He left campus at 2 a.m. on June 19th, went to an off-campus party. He returned to his dorm around 2:30 a.m., and for the next 4 hours, Bias, along with longtime friend Brian Tribble and several teammates, snorted cocaine in the dormitory suite that was shared by Bias and his friends. They say Len Bias had never done the drug before, but he was going to try it to celebrate. Bias reportedly had a seizure. He collapsed while talking with a teammate, and at 6:30 a.m., Tribble called 911. Bias was unconscious. He was not breathing. All attempts by emergency personnel to restart his heart were unsuccessful. They also tried again at the hospital. But Len Bias was pronounced dead at 8:55 a.m. of cardiac arrhythmia related to the use of cocaine. It was reported there were no other drugs, there was no other alcohol in his system. Hey, Len Bias was as close to that sure thing pick as many of us can remember. And going to the Celtics felt like it would have been a great fit for him. He partied. Maybe just once, I don't know. But it cost him. Hey, I would hope that all of this posturing and nonsense by Ja Morant, they're just a blip on the radar of what's still going to be an amazing career. I mean, we're not hearing about drugs. We're not hearing about anything like these guys had from Ja. At least not yet. But when I hear about him sticking his toes into that pool, it does make me worry that he's gambling with something that could end up costing him his career if he doesn't figure things out soon. For his sake, for the NBA's sake, they better hope that he does. Okay, YouTube. Hey, this week on The Dose, we are actually talking a little bit about those NBA playoffs. We have a number of news items to discuss, but then we are taking a look at the NFL schedule that was released last week and looking at some of the more interesting things that came out with it, and maybe even taking a look at a few of the better matchups that came out with it. So make sure you go over and check out the full podcast. I will leave a link here in the comments on YouTube for you. Hope you all are doing well. I will see you next Wednesday. Have a great week.